everyone. I'm sending you good vibes and a great big hug. Welcome back to Be Better with Suzan. I'm your lovely host, Suzan Nguyen. For those of you that aren't familiar with me, I am a speaker. I am a published author of One Arm But Not Unarmed. Also, I'm a life coach on helping others overcome adversity, hardship, and loss. I really love this platform at Be Better with Suzan, and the reason why is I'm able to connect with the community, to be able to shine a light on powerful stories and messages from amazing people. So today in studio, I am extremely excited to introduce my good friend, my mentor, one of my biggest supporters, my brother from another mother. I could go on, but I won't. Derek LaHare.
Good morning. Good morning. So glad to be here with you, Suzan. I really am.
Oh, Derek, you know, I love you so much. You have been a huge part of my journey, and you're my go-to, right? When I get excited about things, I call you when I need, some guidance or whatever the case is, when I need a good laugh. So I appreciate you. I'm happy you're here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Derek LaHare. Grew up right here in North Houston, just 30 minutes up the road. Was born in Florida originally, but my parents were here. They split when I was 5 in 1985, but spent the rest of my time in Houston. Was fortunate enough to be able to grow up on that north side, and then, of course, went to college out in San Antonio, where I met my girlfriend, who is now my wife.
Yes,
we just celebrated 13 years last Monday, which is incredible.
Congrats, you guys.
Thank you, thank you. And we have a beautiful 8-year-old daughter named Autumn
really
Rose. Thank you. So yeah, it's been an incredible journey thus far. So happy to be here with you today.
Thank you so much. And why don't you tell the audience how we met?
So we met at work. It was an amazing story. So I remember very early on we were hiring for a coordinator position, and our boss at the time, our vice president, came in and said that he had found the one. He had found the person for the job, and told us a little bit about you. And I was so excited to be able to meet you, and that's how we met. And I think it was 7 or 8 years ago.
Yes, it was. It was a very long time ago. And shout out to Mattress Firm. It's where it all began for me. That was my first speaking engagement at their national corporate conference. I'm in front of 1,200 people. We were just talking about that earlier. So for me, it's where it all began. And Mattress Firm, the corporate office, will always have a special place in my heart. So why don't we start off with a fun fact about you, Derek?
Fun fact about me. Let's see.
Let's make sure it's appropriate. Okay.
This time I'll do my best. Fun fact about me: I'm a really big guy, but I have a really tiny car, a project car that I'm working on at home, and it's a little 2-door, 2-seater that my daughter and I work on almost every weekend. And then of course when we're not working on it, we're taking it for rides, going to the park, going out to the lake, doing stuff like that.
I love that, the Del Sol.
The
right?
Del Sol. So
The
when you
Del
see me
Sol.
get out of that car, you would not imagine that that I
And
could have ever
love
gotten
it.
in.
I love it because you do have a passion for cars.
I do.
I see the pictures, I see your work, and I love how you continue to spend time with Autumn and have those daughter moments with her. It's so special.
Thank you.
And she is so beautiful. So beautiful.
I know. It's amazing to me. And she just came up to hug me. I think it was yesterday, and I realized that her arms are pretty much up to my chest right now. So that happened very, very fast.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. The last time I saw Autumn was at our lunch in Chinatown.
Mm-hmm.
How fun was that?
Just about a year ago this month.
That was so fun.
That was amazing.
We'll have to do that again.
We need
We'll
to,
have
for
do that
sure.
again. All right, so I would love to jump into Derek's story, but before we do, let's go to a quick commercial break. Thank you.
Transmitiendo desde Houston.
What if you could reach thousands of potentially new clients in just seconds with the sharing of just one business card? It's not possible with your old business card, but it is with Now Media's new video business card. Hi, I'm Michelle Merhar. You may remember me from the morning news. Most people who receive a conventional business card either lose it or toss it within minutes. And with that, the company has lost that lead and likely that sale. At Now Media, our new product is changing the industry. The video business card, recorded with cutting-edge technologies in our studios, is designed to be sent quickly using your smartphone or tablet to your clients, suppliers, or anyone you need to be in contact with. It is fully compatible with any instant messaging application or email system you already have. The Now Media video business card will feature you, along with your contact information, summary of all your company's products or services, and an engaging look. Best of all, it really is affordable for any business, from startups to multinational companies. The Now Media video business cards are already being used by hundreds of companies, and most of them are seeing and feeling the difference in their lead generation and sales. We don't need to tell you how important our Now Media video business card will be to your brand, your customer experience, and your ability to interact with your clients. Call us today at 832-384-9588 or email us at videocard@nowmedia.tv.
Welcome back. So earlier I mentioned that we have an amazing guest in studio by the name of Derek LaHare. I'd like to ask, you went through some major adversity in your life.
Yeah, indeed.
Would you be able to share that with us?
Absolutely. So when I was about 5, my parents divorced. And that's probably not unlike a lot of people that are out there listening today. Most of my friends have parents that are divorced. I think statistics are probably 1 in 2 couples, before the course of their marriage is done, they end up splitting up. And so at that time, some things started to happen for me, some changes. And I began to have some moments of just anger and severe depression and feeling like I had been abandoned. Now, my mom was really cool because she was in the mental health industry when she lived in Florida. She worked for the Palm Beach Medical Society. And so Mom realized very quickly that with all of the changes happening in my life, that it would probably be best if I saw a child psychologist. So we began doing that, and a couple of months went past, and things for me actually weren't getting better, they were getting worse, and nobody could really understand why. And I think what most people had no clue about at that time was that a lot of what was happening to me internally and externally wasn't just because of my parents' divorce. It was because at that same time, I fell victim to a sexual predator. And it was at that time that I began being sexually abused by someone very, very close. And I think that was what people were seeing. They weren't noticing it. And it was happening right under the noses of my parents. It was happening right under the purview of my friends and family, and even my psychologist at the time. And that took place for a period of months upon months upon months. I think I actually went from maybe the age of 5 to about 6.5 before anything came out about that or came to light. And that was a relatively common occurrence. It was every week or every other week. And so that abuse began to undo in me a lot of things. And so because of that, I went through a lot of trials and difficulties. Imagine being 5 and having that happen. And so I never thought, I think growing up, that something like that would happen to me. Of course, even then, wasn't really aware of what that was, because the 5-year-old mind can't really process. In fact, when children disclose to people today that they're being abused, they won't say I'm being sexually abused. What they'll tell their parents, or what they'll tell people that they trust when they do disclose, if they do disclose, is what's happening to them. So they'll describe in very graphic detail what's happening. And so it was a period of time for me where I remember just having a pit in my stomach for months and months and months, because the person that was abusing me was using all sorts of threats and manipulation and lies and coercion to get me to comply so that I wouldn't tell. And it took a very, very long time for that to come out. But when it finally did, it just felt like my world split completely in two. It changed everything about the future, everything about the course of my life in ways that even then there was no way that I could begin to comprehend.
It's a heartbreaking story, and I truly, I'm appreciative of you sharing that with me and with us. When you say that you were able to open up and share those emotions, and you said your world completely changed, how does that look like?
It's interesting. I've always equated it to, being close to, I think, 6 or 7 years old, and being upstairs in my bedroom, thinking about, because my parents had divorced and we lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment, and wanting to tell my mom what was happening. But the person that was abusing me was doing what sexual predators do is a really good job of making you feel like if you tell anybody, something bad will happen. And so this person had used little things at first to get me to comply as they groomed me. And then they started to use big things. So little things at first was, don't tell anybody, you'll be in trouble. And that graduated into, over the course of time, you begin to feel guilt and shame about what's happening. But you're 5 or 6, you don't really understand. And so what they started to do was threaten bodily harm or bodily injury. And the worst, which is really interesting, but probably the most effective for me, was they told me that if I told anybody what was happening, that Santa Claus wouldn't come, and that everybody would know just how bad I had been. And, you know, to be 5 years old and think about the idea of Santa not visiting you, it's a really hard thing to deal with. And I remember sitting upstairs in my bedroom night after night after night, trying to get the courage up to tell my mom what was happening to me, and just thinking that if I did, I knew the trade-off, at least in my mind, was going to be that Santa wouldn't visit me. At some point, the guilt and the shame and everything that I was experiencing outweighed the consequence for me. And I remember going downstairs one night and telling my mom in pretty graphic detail what was happening. And the rest from that point on is somewhat of a blur, because talk about the shift in the world and how everything begins to split. What I had done was the right thing to do. Absolutely. So many people don't get that opportunity. There's probably people out here listening today that are well into adulthood or even advanced in age and maybe have had something similar happen but have never had the opportunity to share because they're scared or fearful of what might happen.
Right.
For me, it was the equivalent of pulling a pin on a grenade and just tossing it in the middle of my living room. Any semblance of family that I had at that point disintegrated. Now, that wasn't my fault, and I think that's what's important for people to know. The person who was sexually abusing me, it was their fault.
Absolutely.
What they had done.
Absolutely.
They caused a rift in the family. They caused those relationships to deteriorate and to go away. But that, for me, was really the beginning of my book, because that's where my mom very quickly realized, because this had happened, now it was even more important for me to get better help, advanced help. And so many people don't get that chance. And so I'm very fortunate to have been at that age. The way that it happened, of course, terrible, heinous crime, not something I would ever wish on anybody, no one at all. But at the same time, so glad that that I didn't wait any longer to tell my mom what was happening, because healing really started for me at an earlier age, I think, than I could have recognized.
Yeah, and I applaud you for that. I really do. I can't really speak on your situation because I haven't experienced anything close to that, but I can understand what you're saying. Some people experience that, but they're afraid to speak up, right? They're fearful. They don't want to be the reason why there's a rift within the family dynamic. They don't want anyone to start judging them or whatever the case is. And there are people that are walking around till this day that has, experienced adulthood that's still hiding that from within, and that must be so tough.
Yeah.
Fortunately, you were able to speak on it. You finally opened up to your mom, and you were vulnerable, and you spoke your truth, and that has helped you come a very long way.
Indeed, it has. The thing that I wasn't prepared for was my healing journey really began at that moment. But what I don't want to give anybody the impression of is that things just started to get better and continued to get better. I want to be real about the fact that while I'll never regret doing that at that age, I was so fortunate to be able to do that. There were a lot of lows in there too, some very deep valleys. But that's part of the healing journey, to get to go through those. For me, I'm glad that I got a chance to do it a bit earlier than a lot of other people. And that's one of the things I hope today, that anybody out there listening who maybe has had something similar happen and hasn't had a chance to come forward, hopefully will. It's not an easy journey to healing, but once that starts, I can promise you we'll all be in a much better place.
Thank you for sharing that. And absolutely, earlier you mentioned you experienced the low of the lows, right? And it's a healing journey. It's a healing process. So it's not the fact that, okay, you open it up and bam, you're good. It's continuation healing. It's a healing journey. And one thing I've learned as well is if we don't give the pain the attention it needs, it will continue to return for resolution. And many people say, oh, it heals with time. To me, I feel like we are able to adapt better within time, and we get stronger, and we're able to deal with it in a better mindset. But it's not easier, though.
No.
Right? Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that. I think you talk about it coming back for resolution. That's really it. Anything that you bury that does not get resolved ultimately always comes back. And it will be at places and times in our lives when we least expect it. For me, I was fortunate to be able to have that counseling and that healing. I think in terms of therapy, I'm not afraid to admit, in fact, I'm really proud, but like 9 or 10 collective years of my life have been spent in front of doctors and people that were really trying to help me heal. But again, that said, at that young of an age, there are just things that you don't realize. For me, being 5 years old and having to go to a doctor for something bad that happened to me meant that, okay, I'm sick. Something has happened to me. If I go to the doctor will help me, and then I'll automatically be better. And that's a very 5-year-old way to look at something. But unfortunately for me, I carried that model into adolescence and adulthood. I've been through therapy. I've been to the doctor. I'm well. I'm done. This is it. I can put this all behind me now. And what I never expected was for what I had been through as a kid, that sexual abuse, to come back knocking later in my life. But it did. Whenever I tried to enter into a serious relationship, whenever I got close to somebody, when I had my first child, the things that you don't think that it will come back to affect, it always does. And for me, it was not just managing the pain, but having a plan for it, and knowing that I was susceptible to it, and not to block it out, but to use it in a way that would be healthy for me and beneficial.
I'm so proud of you, Derek. I really am. I love you so much.
I love you too.
I really do love you. I love your story. I love you for sharing it with me. And you're right. I feel like a lot of us, we go through painful situations. It's all different, right? Yeah. Your story is completely different from mine. But if we don't recognize, confront, and embrace the pain, it does continue to come back in different ways, right? For instance, people walking around and spending money on shopping and they're taking out that way, or bad relationships, or self-medicating, or drinking. I mean, it masks itself and it comes back in very dangerous ways. This is a lot to take in, a lot of heavy stuff. And once again, I really appreciate you for opening up and sharing your story. And we will continue to share your story when we get back from a quick commercial break.
What if you could reach thousands of potentially new clients in just seconds with the sharing of just one business card? It's not possible with your old business card, but it is with Now Media's new video business card. Hi, I'm Michelle Merhar. You may remember me from the morning news. Most people who receive a conventional business card either lose it or toss it within minutes. And with that, the company has lost that lead and likely that sale. At Now Media, our new product is changing the industry. The video business card, recorded with cutting-edge technologies in our studios, is designed to be sent quickly using your smartphone or tablet to your clients, suppliers, or anyone you need to be in contact with. It is fully compatible with any instant messaging application or email system you already have. The Now Media Video Business Card will feature you, along with your contact information, summary of all your company's products or services, and an engaging look. Best of all, it really is affordable for any business, from startups to multinational companies. The Now Media video business cards are already being used by hundreds of companies, and most of them are seeing and feeling the difference in their lead generation and sales. We don't need to tell you how important our Now Media video business card will be to your brand, your customer experience, and your ability to interact with your clients. Call us today at 832-384-9588 or email us at videocard@nowmedia.tv.
Welcome back to Be Better with Suzan. I have an amazing guest in studio today, Derek LaHare. I appreciate you being here. Before we jump back to his story, I'd like to say a quick thank you to my sponsor, Stacy Mai. If you're in the need for real estate to sell, to buy, reach out to her. Stacy Mai, she is the best in the business. She's with Champions Real Estate Group. Pick up the phone and give her a ring. Her number is 832-744-4084. Thank you, Stacy Mai, for your generous sponsorship to Be Better with Suzan. So back to your story, Derek. Once again, I couldn't say thank you enough for sharing that powerful story with me. I realize that it's not easy. So once again, I am just wholeheartedly grateful, and I mean that. So what were the darkest moments during that time? How did that look like?
We talked a moment ago about pain manifesting itself in different ways, especially when you were not paying attention to it. And for me, it manifested itself in a couple of different ways. At a very young age, I developed a severe obsessive compulsive disorder, which I don't know that anybody at the time really correlated to the abuse, but I had an obsession with checking the locks on the house before I could leave, or I couldn't leave unless I had turned this way or made this many steps towards the door. It became crippling to the point where I could almost not function in daily life, and ended up having to go back to the doctor for that because nobody really knew what was happening. It was just a lot of changes. I developed a nervous tic, even a bit of a stutter, which for me is interesting because I love to talk. And so that was really painful, and it really took away my voice even more. And that's one of the things that I think victims of sexual abuse will recognize is we're often silenced by the person who's perpetrated the crime. I began to find my voice a little bit later, but then with OCD, it started to go away. I got nervous to speak in public or in front of people because I had a nervous tic, or I would make sudden jerks or movements. The other thing that it did was it resulted in a ton of insomnia, because the person that attacked me would often come in the middle of the night to do that. And so, not afraid to admit, but essentially sleeping with the light on all of the time, or the TV, locking every door behind me so that nobody could get in. And those were things that I carried into adulthood. I didn't go into my first walk-in closet until I was probably in my late 20s. It took me 25 plus years just to be able to go into a closet. And those are things I think that people often take for granted. Those are normal everyday things. As I started to get older and healed from those things, though, depression manifested in my life. And it wasn't until I was in high school that I realized something was very, very wrong. I was having incredibly dark thoughts. I began to drink pretty heavily, party a lot. My mom was the only person that was there for me, and she told me if I ever did drugs, she would kill me. So that was like the one thing I felt like I couldn't do, but everything else, anything else in terms of risk, I was partaking in on a pretty consistent basis, just to try and drown out what I was feeling. The pain had come back, but I was having trouble processing it and coping with it at this new age. I wasn't 5 anymore. I was 16, 17, and starting to develop really key relationships in my life and not understanding what I was feeling. Feelings of abandonment, feelings like I had no self-worth. I didn't love me. I'm not ashamed to admit that. I just felt like that was something that was never going to happen for me. And if I couldn't love me, then why would anybody else? And so anytime that I met somebody I liked, I just chalked it up to, well, this will never work, because once they find out what's happened to me and they know just how damaged I am, they're not going to want to be with me. And I fell into a very, very deep depression. from the age of about 17, 18, 19, 20, started to come out. Went to a 4-year university, wanted to do something with my life. I didn't just want to sit around and do the same old things with the same old people. I felt like I wasn't really advancing. And so I went to a 4-year university. I moved away from home, and I lost my support system. And it was in that time that I think I experienced the darkest period of my life, a very crippling depression that involved, contemplating ending my life multiple times in multiple ways. And that was, I think, the lowest of the low. My girlfriend and I had broken up. I was not around any of my friends. I didn't have access to them. I was in a completely new place. My mom wasn't there. I didn't know anybody, and I felt more alone, I think, than I've ever felt before in my life. And some very dark moments took place in that time that were almost indescribable. And I know we've talked and you've had similar moments. And so I think that's not unique to people that have experienced pain. No matter what the circumstance was that caused it, the thing that unites us in that respect is that pain. And so, I just want people to know that if they're out there feeling like that, it doesn't have to end that way. Yeah. And I think that's what's most important.
You're absolutely right. And we've shared our stories together. Regardless of the experience, the pain is what actually brings us together. Yeah. And we can understand each other on that level. When you mention, contemplating, taking your own life, I thought about that. Self-medicating, right? Lowest of the low, right? But one thing I can say now is that our past doesn't define us, right? And it's only made us better. Right? And it's so hard to even process that, right? Like when I'm how I am and I'm, super bubbly and I'm, excited about every little thing, and people are like, are you really that happy? Like, why are you so happy? And some people just can't really process and understand that. It's so hard. It's so tough. We've experienced the lowest of the low. We've experienced moments where we didn't want to be alive. We experienced moments where we didn't think anyone could ever love us again, right? But it can happen. It does happen. It's happened for the both of us. Life has gotten better, right? So one thing I must say is please don't think that your past experiences can define you in any way. And it is very possible to be able to move forward from that hardship, from that adversity.
And I think that's what was tough for me to realize, and it's tough for a lot of people to realize is that's not the whole story. That's just a chapter in the book. Yeah. And if we're at a moment in our lives where that chapter keeps getting repeated and reread, one of the things that was important for me to know was that you don't just become better overnight, but it's the recognition of a destructive pattern. And that's what I realized, was that I wasn't advancing to the next chapter. And there are so many blank pages in that book that have yet to be written. And so I can reread that chapter, but if I dwell on it for too long, that can be a very dark place for me.
Absolutely.
And you're absolutely right. Our past doesn't happen just to define us, but it can be part of who we are, and we can use it to make ourselves better.
Yeah, you're right. It is a part of who we are, and we can take those lessons that we've learned, those hard lessons, and help others overcome anything they may be going through. And that's something I believe in. In the beginning, I feel like I was so embarrassed of how I felt, right? I didn't want to share. I wasn't ready to be vulnerable with anyone. That's why I was angry. That's why my emotions got the best of me. That's why I let the anger destroy my life, and I ended up in jail, right? Over, a confrontation that happened. That's why I started self-medicating, because I wasn't vulnerable. I wasn't ready to speak about it. But once you are, magic happens, things change. And one thing I've learned is never be embarrassed of your story, because it can actually help inspire others. And also, every time I share my story, just like what we were speaking earlier, every time I'm crying, every time I get emotional, I'm actually healing, and it feels really good. So thank you so much for sharing that. And something else I wanted to touch on was emotional pain, right? It's something I actually speak on in my TED Talk as well. It's about recognizing, confronting, embracing pain. It's about being vulnerable. It's about identifying emotions. And emotional pain can be so dangerous. It can be as crippling as physical pain. So it's crucial that we are vulnerable and that we recognize it and confront it. And just like you said, it doesn't happen overnight. I am still working on being better. Right. Every day, each day, there are some days where I have hard times. And sometimes when I'm a little bit negative and I'm thinking, oh, this isn't working out, that isn't working out. But then I realize if I allow myself to be negative for a long time, then it's only going to pull me back to that dark place. So I'm not. Can you resonate with that?
Yeah, I can indeed. I think part of it is, again, that recognition and then putting in place healthy coping mechanisms. You know, you've now written a book. You have your show. You get to speak about this in front of people, and those are healthy ways, I think, to process. The thing that it always reminds me of, and hate to be a little bit of a nerd here, but no. Batman Begins with Christian Bale. You know, in the very beginning scenes of that movie, he's a young boy. He falls down the well, and it's dark, and it's damp, and it's cold, and then all of a sudden there's bats just encircling him. And you see this transition in the movie later to where he's using the thing that brought him so much pain to make himself and the city he loves so much better. And I think that's what it is recognizing what are the good things that we can do. You know, and I know that not everybody gets an opportunity to speak about their pain. And even survivors of sexual abuse, if they've not disclosed, I want to make sure that they know that that's okay. No one is obligated to speak on their story. They get to choose to do so within their time. But I know for me, it's a very healthy thing, because if I get trapped in old patterns, I know what I automatically want to run to. I know what I automatically want to do. And I have to be responsible now. It's not just me. I have a family. I'm married. I have a wife. I have a daughter. When it was just me, I could self-destruct, and that's not healthy. But the repercussions for people around me were pretty small. Now they're very large. And so we have those healthy coping mechanisms. Like you said, if you recognize that you're in a thought pattern that you don't want to be in, you actively choose to do this instead of that. For me, it's writing, it's reading, it's fishing, it's spending time with my daughter, it's that silly project car that I have sitting in the garage that I'm too big to fit into, but it's an outlet for me to process. And for me, you know, what's super important is my faith. And so in those moments, a lot of times there is solitude, but it's healthy because I feel like I'm spending time in prayer or even time with God. And I find that so incredibly healing. And those aren't always easy conversations, but I know that it's better than what I would want to do normally. And so I love what you said about recognizing those patterns and doing something actively to change the direction.
Yeah, I feel like we must acknowledge those negative patterns that we're experiencing. It's all about acknowledging and recognizing. And also, you're right? Not everyone is ready to speak about their pain, but one thing I do encourage is being vulnerable. I'm not asking anyone to go on a stage and share it with 1,200 people, but lean to those around you, to your loved ones, because once you start being vulnerable and speaking about it to your spouse or to your best friend or to your mentor, whoever it is, it does help. It does really help. I can speak about vulnerability all day because that's something I'm extremely passionate about, and that's a reason why my recovery was delayed, because I wasn't ready to talk about it. I wasn't ready to tell people that I hate looking in the mirror. I hate looking at myself. I'm disgusted with how I look. I feel deformed. Like, I wasn't ready to tell people that because I was so humiliated and embarrassed. But once, years later, it took so much time to build up the nerve to be able to tell my boyfriend, husband now, or to tell my friends, this is how I'm feeling. It started helping me move forward in my recovery. But when I was hiding those emotions, man, it ate me up inside. my heart was so heavy. But when you start releasing it, it feels a lot better. So yes, I feel like you should speak on your pain whenever you're ready. This is your journey. This is your story. Share when you're ready. But I would say do share with someone, because once you do, it really does help you internally. So one thing I'd like to ask Derek is, through through everything you've mentioned, and those dark times, what was the turning point that made you realize you needed to move forward?
So for me, it was back to that moment in college where I think I was at a place that day where I was going to make a really bad decision. I was sitting outside, reading, studying. The day was beautiful. I remember it was a crisp, clear blue day. I think it was in February, probably of 2001. My life had just been in shambles. And I remember putting my head down into my arms and just hiding in public in plain sight. I think most people probably thought that I was asleep. But what I had really started to do was to pray. And that wasn't something that I had done prior to. I want to be clear about that. That wasn't a place that I really turned. And I just remember thinking all of these negative thoughts and feeling overwhelmed by the weight of the world, and just crying out to God and saying, if you're real, because I wasn't sure at that point, if you're real, just send me one person. Just send me someone to connect to. Because like you said, when you share is up to you, but sharing is important, because I think one of the greatest lies the devil ever told is to make us feel like we're all alone in our suffering and our pain. And human connection is why we're here. I think it's by design. And I remember feeling just so down at that moment, and then hearing a voice say, excuse me. And I remember looking up, and I had had my face buried for so long, the light was almost too bright and overwhelming, and there was a man standing in front of me. And he didn't look like he belonged there. He looked quite a bit older than everybody else that I had seen on campus. And I thought, what does this guy want? Maybe directions or something like that. And he said, hi, my name is Mark. This is going to sound really crazy, but I was walking past, going to the library to have a meeting with some students, and I just felt like God told me I should speak to you.
Oh my God.
And it was wild. Oh. That was really the beginning for me. It was like, I'm not alone in this. He is listening. Oh. Just because it happened to me doesn't mean that he wasn't present, or that he wasn't there, or that he wasn't watching over me. I think a lot of people wonder why bad things happen to good people. The deeper question I think most people want to ask is, if God exists and he loves me, then why would he let bad things happen to me? And I think it's a consequence of sin in the world and pain. The person who chose to do this to me was fighting their own battle. And unfortunately, the way that they chose to deal with it manifested itself in this way. And I remember looking at this gentleman thinking, is this real? Was I really just praying for one friend, and here this guy is? And now he's inviting me to Bible study? Like, wow. There's no way on any other plane in this universe that could have happened. And so I began to get involved in the student ministry, which I thought was really amazing. But even more so, I was taking psychology classes in college. I wanted to learn more about myself. They say that people that have had like the most trauma want to go into psychology or the psychological field, and that was me. I minored in it, but I wanted to learn more about myself. And the turning point for me was the recognition of, I was doing a report for school, and I remember diving into the statistics of children of sexual abuse. And what I think alarmed me the most was that they're not in my favor. They're not in our favor at all as survivors of sexual abuse. They're just not. The divorce rate increases, the increase of alcohol and drug abuse. And that's not to say that if you've been sexually abused that you're destined for those things, right. But there is a greater propensity for those things to happen in your life. And I knew that I wanted to be married. I wanted to have a successful family. No one in my family up to that point had done it. I wanted to be married. I wanted to have children. And I very quickly realized, how am I ever going to love anybody if I can't even love myself? Mm-hmm. And so I think that was really the turning point for me. It was a recognition of a need for God in my life, but it was also the understanding of, hey, the reason that this hasn't been successful for any generation prior to me and my family is because we're in this vicious cycle. No one really understood what that meant. And so I knew that at that point in my life, I needed help more than ever. And so I chose to go back and to see a doctor in my early 20s that I knew would, I think, help me. My mom was very instrumental in that. I'd begun going to a local church, Max Lucado's church, Oak Hills, and they said, sorry, Derek, we don't really do anything like this, because I was reaching out for help. And they said, but we do know a guy who does. And they put me in touch with this man that I just feel like single-handedly helped change the course of my life, because I told him, here's what I want out of it, but I feel like right now I'm my own worst enemy. I'm letting all of this stuff from my past define me and stop me, and I don't want that for me anymore. And it took a long time to arrive at that point, to go through the lowest of the lows, to be at a point where I'm sitting at a table literally contemplating ending my life that day, and a man comes up to me and says, hey, just felt like you needed a friend. And that was next step for me.
Yes,
So.
that's an incredible story. Thank you for sharing.
Thank
That
you.
gave me goosebumps. And what is your friend's name? You said he has completely helped you change your life. What's his name?
So Mark was the gentleman that introduced me, and from that point I got in touch with campus ministry. It was a gentleman named John Allert. He was super, super instrumental. And then in San Antonio, the doctor that I used that helped me was Dr. Steven Cervantes.
Thank you.
I don't know if he's out there now, but if he is,
Thank you
oh my
so
gosh,
much.
thank you so
Yeah.
much. All these years later, to be watching almost, 15, 16 years later, to be thinking about being at that point and then being where I am today. And I don't want people to, like you said earlier, I don't want people to think that it's just all rainbows and unicorns now. We have tough days. You and I both know that, because on those days we'll often call each other, or we'll share with our spouse, and talk to our family. So it doesn't mean that you won't still have those days. It just
Right.
means that now you know what to do
Absolutely.
and you have a plan.
Absolutely. Thank you to those gentlemen for helping out my good friend.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you, seriously, how far you've grown, and really taking that experience and now sharing it with others, and just the way you've persevered. And now you're a great father, a great husband, and you've learned to love yourself and pass that love on to your beautiful family. You're an amazing soul, and I'm just so honored to have you a part of my life.
Same.
And you're right. It's not about, rainbows and butterflies and things are just so great now. I mean, we still have our bad days, and there are even more stories that we have that we don't even share, right? There's a lot of grief, a lot of sorrow that we've experienced, but I really appreciate that, Derek. So tell me, what was the biggest lesson that you have taken from that experience?
I think from everything, I was under the impression for so long that what happened to me was just for me, that it couldn't help impact other people in a positive way. I don't know why I never really made that connection. And I'm fortunate enough to be in a spot where before my father passed away, I forgave him. And I'm also in a spot where, and this may be controversial to some, but I've had the opportunity to forgive the person who sexually abused me, who raped me all those months, all those years, to be in that spot. That was really the beginning of freedom for me. They say that bitterness is like taking a poison pill and waiting for the other person to die. And that forgiveness, though it's not easy, and it is continual. And it was a choice that I made, even though I know some would say, I could never. How could I? I was there too. And for me to be able to move past what happened, that forgiveness is what enabled me to make that transition. But even still, I was always under the impression that my story was just for me, that it couldn't really impact anybody. And when my daughter was born, it very quickly occurred to me, I don't want what happened to me to happen to her. And so if you've got kids, it's important that you talk to them at a very young age about their body safety and what that means Because I think one conversation with me, and this is not an indictment of anybody in my family system, it was the early 80s. What did any of us know? But now it's so much more prevalent. There are movements around it. Talk to your kids about what it means to be safe. And I think that was the connection, was I never want what happened to me to happen to my daughter. I can begin very early with her an education, an understanding of what it means to be safe, what bad touch is, what good touch is. And it occurred to me then that maybe what happened to me wasn't just for me, but it was for her too, so that she would never have to go through what I went through, hopefully. And that opened up my mind to a lot, because I thought, well, if I could help her by telling this story, then who else could I help?
Absolutely.
And that's when I realized that for me, it's a personal choice to be able, like you, it's a personal choice to be able to tell your story. But for me, it was this awakening. It was like, oh my gosh, how many people could I impact? How many people do I know who have kids? Or how many people have I told my story to that look at me and say, hey, me too.
Yeah.
I've never told anybody, Derek.
Right.
You're the first person.
Right.
I'm 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. I've never told anybody this, but there's an impact that it has. And I was looking at it not selfishly from an intentional perspective, but just thinking that it happened to me. That was something that happened. I'll continue to work and get better. It will always have an impact, but how I manage it is something that's important to me, not realizing that there's a whole other group of people out here. The statistics are interesting. I've heard as few as 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys will be the victims of sexual abuse before the age of 18. New statistics combined make it seem a little bit better, but there's never any such thing as better when you're talking about the sexual abuse of children. But 1 in 10 kids, 10% of all kids will have something like this happen to them in their lifetime before they reach adolescence. And so for me, it was this transition in thinking that I could take what happened, talk about it in a healthy manner, talk about what it takes to get there, those dark, dark moments, those low lows, and the high highs, and let people know that help and hope and healing is all possible. And above that, so is happiness.
I love you so much.
I love you too.
I love you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that, Derek. Oh. I'm sorry, I'm just at a loss for words. I'm just processing everything, and it's just, you are just so incredible. Your story is just so powerful, and I get lost in your story. I think about what you must have experienced, and where you are now, and I'm just so proud of you. I just love you so much, and I'm just so grateful that you're here sharing your story. And I guess the final question I have is, I think you went over it, but I just wanted you to echo it. What would your advice be for people out there going through something similar to what you went through?
Yeah, I think it is those things. It's, again, the greatest lie the devil ever told us to make us feel like we're alone. You're not, in any circumstance. Whether you're the victim of sexual abuse, whether you're the victim of sexual assault, whether you're the victim of any kind of trauma or pain, there's someone out there willing to listen. If you've been through what I've been through, and especially as a male survivor, I feel like we're almost more of a rare species in a sense, because there's not a ton of attention all the time on male survivors, because males are less likely to speak up. But if you are out there struggling and suffering, you're not alone. There is help. You can disclose to somebody that you trust, like you talked about a moment ago. Find that one person who you know is going to say, I believe you, who you know is going to say, I'm here for you. And if you don't feel like that person exists, you could email one of us.
Yeah.
And we can put you in touch with the right people. There's RAIN up in New York, Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network. They have a hotline full of qualified professionals. All they do is talk to survivors of abuse. And sometimes that's the first time anybody's ever reached out. So if you don't feel like your system is safe enough, or maybe it happened within that family dynamic and you don't want to talk about it with them, but you want to talk to somebody, look up the RAIN hotline, RAINN. So there is help. There is hope. There is hope. I promise you, it can and does get better. even when it doesn't feel like it. And I think we've all been at those moments where we just felt like this was it. This was as good as it was ever going to be, and that's not good enough. And yet, on the flip side of that, you've experienced it, I've experienced it. There can and is so much better out there for us to experience. You talk about your relationship with Fu, your husband, and how sacred that is to you, and my relationship with Chrissy, my wife, and my daughter Autumn. Those things I never thought were possible, but they give me hope on a continual basis. And there is healing. There is healing available out there, and a lot of times, I would say almost every time, it begins with that human connection that you talked about. So even if you're not at a point where you can get in front of a microphone or stand in front of a camera like we're doing today, that's okay, but talk to somebody, because that's really the beginning of healing. I shudder to think about what would have happened if I hadn't gone downstairs that night and told my mom when I did. How many more years would I have lived with this? And if that's you, understandable, like not an easy thing to do. And I get it. I get why so many people are quiet. The first time I shared my story with anybody, I remember thinking just how nervous I was. It was a one-on-one kind of situation, and they just broke down crying. And I'm like, I know, pretty crazy, right? And they looked at me and said, no, Derek, you don't understand. The same thing happened to me. But I'm in my mid to late 20s. I've never told anybody. So there is help, there is hope, there is healing, and there is happiness. There's a life out there that people can't see as being possible because they haven't experienced it. And how many of us know that our expectations are so often different from what reality is? But I find that true happiness is in those unexpected things. It's my daughter, yesterday handing me a little rock and saying, Daddy, take this with you. Leave it in your pocket so that you'll think of me today. So every time I reached into my pocket, I felt this rock, and I thought of her. But that's not something I ever thought that I could have as a child. And it just happened to me yesterday.
Yeah.
And so all of those things are possible. The road to them is not easy. So I don't want to misrepresent what that journey looks like. But it's being better in spite of the pain. It's knowing that you can use it and leverage it to your benefit at some point, even though it may seem like it's the thing that controls and cripples you. You can be in charge of it, and you can manage it. And if you're out there listening and something like this has happened to you, I want you to know it's not your fault, never your fault, and that healing is possible.
Thank you so much, Derek. I appreciate that. And yeah, I'd like to echo that, right? Our whole life, our life is our decision, what we decide to do, how we decide to respond to those situations. And many of us, we go through some hardship, some major adversity, and we feel like giving up. You've experienced that many times. I have as well, but it's right at that cusp. Just don't give up. Keep going, because you never know what's on the other side if you don't keep going. So just know that there's help out there. There's hope. You can be happy after something traumatic. We're living proof of that, right?
Amen.
We are. And I just really appreciate you being here, for your time, sharing your story. I love and respect you, and I have so much gratitude for you, Derek.
Well, same.
I love you, buddy.
I love you too. Thank you so much for having me on.
No problem.
It means the world.
Thank you so much, and that's it for today. I hope you tune in next time. Let's be better together. Thank you.